The transport station on Frontier Colony 7 was a chaotic mess of beings from 100 different worlds, all trying to catch connections to somewhere else in the galaxy. The air recyclers struggled against the overwhelming mixture of alien pheromones, industrial lubricants, and what Marcus Rivera could only describe as desperation. Holographic departure boards flickered overhead, announcing delays in 17 different languages, while automated vendors hawked overpriced nutrition packs to stranded travelers. Marcus sat slumped against a support pillar in Concourse D, his duffel bag clutched between his knees, exhausted from 3 weeks of grueling contract work in the mining asteroids of the Kepler belt. His muscles ached from the extended shifts in low gravity, and his mind felt numb from the isolation. The work paid well, but it came at a cost. Long hours alone in the black, with nothing but the sound of his own breathing and the distant pings of the mining equipment. All he wanted was to board his transport back to Earth, sleep for about 14 hours straight in a real bed with actual gravity, and forget the crushing loneliness that came with working in the void. Maybe grab some real food that didn't come from a reconstituted paste dispenser. Maybe watch the rain fall on Seattle and remember what it felt like to be part of a living world. That's when he felt it. A small weight against his shoulder, warm and unexpectedly trusting. Marcus turned his head carefully and found himself staring at a child. An alien child, no more than 6 or 7 by human standards, with delicate orange skin that seemed to glow faintly in the station's harsh fluorescent lighting. Her hair was pale blonde, almost white, falling in soft waves around her small face. She wore a tattered gray jumpsuit several sizes too large, the fabric worn thin at the knees and elbows. Her tiny body was curled against his side as if seeking warmth, her small chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of sleep. She was beautiful in that heartbreaking way that all children are when they are vulnerable and innocent. Marcus glanced around, searching for a parent or guardian. The station was packed with travelers, Centaurian merchants arguing over shipping manifests, a group of Draxian laborers heading to construction sites in the outer colonies, human tourists loaded down with souvenir bags. But no one seemed to be looking for a lost child. The beings nearest to him, a cluster of Centaurian merchants with their elaborate head crests, pointedly avoided eye contact when he tried to catch their attention. "Hey," Marcus said softly, gently shaking the girl's shoulder. "Hey, kid. Where's your family?" The child's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises of the most startling violet he'd ever seen. They were enormous, taking up nearly half her face, with vertical pupils that contracted in the light. The eyes held a depth of sadness that no child should possess, an ancient grief that seemed entirely at odds with her young face. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking, then slowly sat up, wrapping her thin arms around herself. Marcus could see her ribs through the thin fabric of her jumpsuit. When had she last eaten a proper meal? "Do you speak standard?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice gentle and non-threatening. The girl nodded slowly, but still didn't speak. Her eyes darted around the station nervously, as if she expected something terrible to emerge from the crowd at any moment. Her small hands trembled slightly as she gripped her own arms. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He'd seen that look before during his brief stint as a volunteer at the orphanages on Mars, back when Sarah had been alive and they'd talked about adoption, about giving a home to children who had none. This child was alone, truly, desperately alone. "Where are your parents?" He tried again, keeping his voice gentle and steady. The girl's lower lip trembled, and she pointed upward with one small finger. Marcus followed her gesture to the massive viewport overhead, where stars glittered against the endless black like diamonds scattered on velvet. His heart sank. In space, pointing to the stars usually meant one thing: they were gone, dead, lost to the void that claimed so many who ventured beyond the safety of planetary atmospheres. "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly, and he meant it. He knew what loss felt like, knew the hollow ache that never quite went away. He knew he should call station security, get the girl to child services. That was the responsible thing to do, the legal thing. But something held him back. The way she'd gravitated to him, the trust she'd shown by falling asleep against a complete stranger, suggested she was desperate for any scrap of kindness. And if she was avoiding the authorities, there was probably a good reason. The girl suddenly grabbed his sleeve, her small fingers surprisingly strong. She shook her head frantically, her eyes wide with fear that bordered on panic. What's wrong?" She tugged on his sleeve harder, pulling him down so she could whisper in his ear. Her breath was warm against his skin, and her voice was tiny, heavily accented with the lilting tones of the Kelthari language. "Please, don't call the guards. They'll send me to the facilities." Marcus had heard about the facilities, overcrowded orphanages scattered across the frontier colonies, where alien children without families were warehoused until they came of age or until someone found a use for them. The stories were grim. Abuse, neglect, children sold into indentured servitude contracts that were barely legal. The galactic community talked a good game about protecting the vulnerable, but out here on the frontier, enforcement was spotty at best. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. "Lyra," she whispered. "Lyra Shankara. I'm Marcus." He studied her carefully, noting the distinctive features that marked her as Kelthari. The orange skin, the oversized eyes, the delicate bone structure. Kelthari were one of the newer species to join the galactic community, hailing from a frozen world called Kelshara on the edge of known space. They were known for their empathic abilities, their unusual bond-forming rituals, and their fierce devotion to family. "How long have you been alone, Lyra?" 43 days. Her voice was barely audible over the station's ambient noise. "Since the raiders came." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling rage bubble up inside him. The frontier colonies were supposed to be safe. That's what the propaganda said, what the settlement agencies promised desperate families looking for new opportunities. But pirates and slavers still operated in the outer reaches, preying on small settlements and trading convoys. Government patrols were spread too thin, response times too slow. Lyra's family had probably been killed in a raid, and she'd somehow managed to escape. "Have you been living in the station this whole time?" Lyra nodded, her blonde hair falling across her face. "I hide in the maintenance tunnels during the day. I find food in the waste recyclers after the vendors close, and I look for someone who feels safe." "Safe." She placed a small hand over her heart, right where a Kelthari's primary empathic organ resided. "Kelthari can feel what others feel. It's how we know who to trust. Most beings here are angry or scared or hungry. Their emotions are sharp like broken glass, but you—" She tilted her head, studying him with those enormous violet eyes. You feel sad but also kind, like you've lost something too. Your sadness is soft like snow. It doesn't hurt to be near you. Marcus felt exposed under her gaze as if she could see straight through to the wounded parts of his soul. She was right, of course. He'd lost his wife Sarah and their unborn child 2 years ago to a medical complication during a supply shortage on a mining station. The doctors had tried everything, but sometimes medicine failed. Sometimes the universe was just cruel. The pain had driven him to the asteroids, to the lonely work that let him avoid forming new connections, avoid the risk of losing someone again. An announcement echoed through the station, the synthetic voice cutting through his thoughts. Transport 447 to Earth Orbital Station now boarding at Gate 12. All passengers should proceed to boarding immediately. This is the final call for Transport 447. That was his transport. Marcus looked down at Lyra, then at Gate 12, where other passengers were filing through the security scanners. He could leave her here, call security on his way to the gate. Someone else would handle it. She wasn't his responsibility. He had his own demons to fight, his own grief to carry. But then Lyra looked up at him with those impossibly sad eyes, and he saw his own grief reflected back at him. Two broken souls in a cold, uncaring universe, both knowing what it meant to lose everything. Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Come on," he said, standing and offering his hand. "You're coming with me?" Lyra's face transformed. Hope blazed across her features like sunrise on a new world, chasing away the shadows of fear and despair. She took his hand without hesitation, her small fingers wrapping around his calloused palm, and together they walked toward the gate. Marcus's heart pounded as they approached the boarding officer, a bored-looking Taurian with 4 arms and scales that gleamed under the station lights. This was the moment where his impulsive decision could fall apart. But the officer barely glanced at them, his scanner sweeping over Marcus's contractor credentials. The system beeped green. Marcus's voucher allowed him one dependent on his travel ticket, a perk meant for families that he'd never used. "Proceed to boarding Tube 7, the officer droned, already waving forward the next passenger. Just like that, Lyra Shankara became his shadow. On the transport, Marcus used his seniority credits to secure them a small private cabin. It wasn't much, 2 bunks built into the wall, a tiny refresher with a sonic shower and a porthole looking out at the stars. But Lyra stared at it as if he'd handed her a palace. Her eyes went wide, taking in the clean sheets, the temperature controls, the privacy door that actually locked. "This is ours," she asked softly. "For the next 3 days, yeah, then we'll figure out something more permanent." Lyra climbed onto the lower bunk and immediately curled into a ball, watching him with cautious eyes. Marcus noticed she positioned herself in the corner, back against the wall, a defensive posture that spoke of too many nights sleeping in unsafe places. "You can sleep," Marcus said, stowing his duffel in the small locker. "We've got a 3-day journey ahead. You're safe now, I promise." "You won't leave while I sleep?" The question was small, vulnerable. The question broke his heart. "I won't leave. I'll be right here on the upper bunk, and the door is locked. Nothing can get in." Lyra's eyes drifted closed, exhaustion finally claiming her small body. Within minutes, her breathing deepened into the rhythm of true sleep. Marcus climbed onto the upper bunk and pulled out his data pad, already researching Kael'thari guardianship laws and immigration protocols. What he'd done was technically illegal. removing a minor from a station without proper documentation, transporting her across jurisdictional boundaries without authorization. But he'd worry about the paperwork later. Right now, a child was safe and sleeping peacefully for probably the first time in weeks. The transport jumped to FTL, and the stars outside became streamers of light, beautiful and hypnotic. Marcus watched them for a while, then looked down at Lyra sleeping below. She'd curled around a pillow like it was something precious, her small face finally relaxed. On the second day, Lyra began to open up. She told him about her world, about Kelshara's ice forests that sang in the wind, about the aurora that painted the sky every night in colors that had no names in standard. She told him about her mother, Sira, who'd been a musician, playing an instrument called a shentar that produced sounds humans couldn't hear, but that made Kelthari children laugh with joy. She told him about her father, Tomas, a human who'd fallen in love with a Kelthari woman and left Earth to build a life on her frozen world. He'd been a botanist, obsessed with the challenge of growing earth crops in Kelshara's harsh environment. Papa always said that love was the greatest adaptation, Lyra said softly. That caring for someone could make you stronger than any evolution. They'd left their world seeking better opportunities in the frontier colonies, hoping to use Tomas's agricultural expertise to help terraform a new settlement. They'd been promised land, resources, a chance to build something meaningful. Instead, they'd found death. The raiders came at night, Lyra said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Marcus had to lean close to hear her over the transport's engine hum. Papa hid me in the cargo hold of our transport. He made me promise to stay quiet no matter what I heard. I heard sounds, screaming, Mama's shentar breaking, then weapons fire, then nothing. Tears rolled down her orange cheeks, and Marcus felt his own eyes burn. When I came out, everyone was gone. The transport was damaged, drifting, bodies everywhere. I was alone for 3 days before a salvage crew found us. They brought the ship to the station, took everything of value, even Mama's broken shentar, and just left me there. Said dealing with orphan paperwork wasn't worth their time. Marcus felt his fists clench. The salvagers had likely sold everything they could and abandoned a traumatized child rather than deal with the bureaucracy of reporting her. It was despicable, but not uncommon in the lawless outer colonies where regulations were suggestions and morality was negotiable. I'm sorry, Lyra, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. You deserved better. Your parents deserved better. Lyra climbed into his lap, something she'd been doing more frequently, as if physical closeness helped her feel secure, helped ground her empathic senses. You're sad like me, she observed, her small hand resting over his heart. I can feel it. Deep sadness, old pain. Who did you lose? Marcus hesitated. He never talked about Sarah, about hope. The wound was still too raw, even after 2 years. But something about Lyra's honesty, her trust, made him want to reciprocate. He found himself telling her about Sarah, about how they'd met at university, about their dreams of exploring the frontier together, about the pregnancy that had filled them both with joy, about the baby they'd named Hope even though she'd never taken a breath, about Sarah's death from complications that should have been preventable, about the guilt and anger and crushing loneliness that had driven him to the edges of human space. We're the same, Lyra said softly when he finished. Broken pieces looking for somewhere to fit. Maybe. Marcus agreed, surprised to find that talking about it had helped just a little. Or maybe we're finding a way to be whole again. On the third day, as Earth grew large in the viewport, a blue marble swirled with white clouds, Marcus made preparations. He'd contacted a lawyer through the ship's communication system, a woman named Chen who specialized in xeno-adoption cases. He'd explained the situation, leaving nothing out. Chen had been frank with him during their video call. You understand this will be difficult. Single human males aren't typically approved as guardians for alien children, especially Kelthari. Their empathic nature requires specific environmental considerations. You'll need training, psychological evaluation, home visits. And there's the question of how you acquired her. Removing a child from a station without documentation could be considered trafficking in some jurisdictions. I couldn't leave her there, Marcus had said simply. Chen had studied him through the screen, her sharp eyes assessing. Tell me, Mr. Rivera, when she looks at you, what does she do? She climbs into my lap, touches my chest over my heart, says my emotions feel safe. Chen had smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her serious face. Then you have something in your favor. She's bonded with you. The lawyer explained that Kelthari children could form what was called a heart bond, an empathic connection with a protective figure that was as real and necessary as food or water. Once formed, breaking such a bond could cause severe psychological damage, even death in extreme cases. The bond was sacred in Kelthari culture, recognized across the galaxy as inviolable. Lyra had chosen Marcus, and her well-being now depended on him. When they docked at Earth Orbital, Marcus expected to be met by security, possibly arrested. Instead, he found Chen waiting at the arrival gate with a representative from the Interspecies Child Welfare Bureau. Mr. Rivera, Chen said, shaking his hand briskly. This is Director Akaffer. He's here to assess the situation. Director Akaffer was a tall Nigerian man with kind eyes, silver-streaked hair, and a tablet bristling with forms and legal documentation. He knelt down to Lyra's level, his movements slow and non-threatening. Hello, young one. My name is James. Can you tell me what happened to you? Lyra pressed herself against Marcus's leg but managed to explain her story in halting standard. Akaffer listened carefully, occasionally glancing at his tablet. Marcus realized the device was monitoring Lyra's empathic output, the emotional resonance that Kelthari children couldn't fully control. When she finished, Akaffer stood and looked at Marcus. His expression was unreadable. The readings are clear. She's formed a primary heart bond with you. The attachment signature is strong, stable. Separating you now would be inadvisable, potentially fatal. So she can stay with me? Marcus asked, hardly daring to hope. Provisionally, you'll need to undergo extensive training in Kelthari child-rearing practices, submit to psychological evaluation, provide a suitable home environment. You'll also need to learn their language, their customs, their dietary requirements. Kelthari children need specific mineral supplements, and their empathic organs require regular meditation exercises. Akaffer's expression softened. But Mr. Rivera, I've been doing this work for 20 years. I know a genuine bond when I see one. This child chose you for a reason. Don't make me regret giving you this chance. I won't, Marcus promised, his hand unconsciously moving to rest on Lyra's head. I swear it. 6 months later, Marcus stood in his new apartment in the Earth District of New Seattle. watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Lyra played with other children at the building's community center 3 floors below. The apartment had cost most of his savings. A 2-bedroom unit with proper environmental controls that could simulate Kelshara's cooler temperatures and adjust the lighting to match their longer day cycles. Lyra had gained weight, her orange skin now glowing with health rather than malnourishment. She'd lost the haunted look in her violet eyes and was learning to smile again, learning to be a child rather than a survivor. The apartment was modest by Earth standards, but they'd made it home together, filling it with plants that reminded Lyra of her father's botanical work, hanging crystals in the windows that caught the light like Kelshara's aurora, playing music that echoed her mother's songs. Marcus had quit the asteroid mining, taking Chen's advice to find work that kept him planet-side. He'd gotten a position as an engineering consultant with a firm that designed life support systems for mixed-species habitats. The pay was less, but the hours were regular, and he could be home for dinner every night. He'd completed the Guardian training, 16 weeks of intensive classes on Kelthari biology, psychology, and culture. He'd passed all the psychological evaluations, endured the home visits, demonstrated his commitment. The formal adoption proceedings were scheduled for the following year, but in every way that mattered, Lyra was already his daughter. But more than the legal status, something profound had shifted between them. Lyra had taught him to feel again, to hope again, to believe that the future could hold something other than pain. And he'd given her what she'd needed most: safety, stability, and unconditional love. That evening, as they sat together watching the sunset over Puget Sound, the sky painted in oranges and purples that reminded Lyra of home, she climbed into his lap for their evening ritual. It was a comfort for both of them now, a way of reinforcing their bond. "Papa Marcus," she said. She'd started calling him that a month ago, and it still made his heart swell every time. "Yes, Lyra. I'm glad I fell asleep on you that day, at the station. I was so tired and so scared, but when I felt your emotions, I knew you were safe. I knew you would help me." Marcus wrapped his arms around her, this precious child who dozed off on a stranger's lap and woken up in a new life. "Me too, sweetheart, me too. You saved me just as much as I saved you. Really, really, I was lost just like you. I'd forgotten how to hope, but you reminded me." Lyra nestled closer, her small hand over his heart where she could feel his emotions most clearly. "Your sadness is still there," she observed. "But it's different now, softer, and there's something else, something warm and bright." "That's you," Marcus said simply. "That's love." In that moment, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, Marcus understood that healing came in unexpected forms. Sometimes it arrived as a scared child with orange skin and violet eyes, seeking nothing more than a moment of warmth in a cold universe. Sometimes it arrived in the form of a stranger willing to take a chance, to open a wounded heart one more time. And sometimes that single moment of trust was enough to change everything, to transform 2 broken pieces into a family whole and bright and new, to prove that love could indeed be the greatest adaptation, strong enough to cross species, to bridge worlds, to heal even the deepest wounds. The orphan alien girl had fallen asleep on a stranger's lap. The next moment, she'd found a father. And he'd found his reason to live again, his purpose, his hope. Together, they would build something beautiful from the ruins of their separate tragedies. Together, they would be whole.